Hello. This is a video about Helicon filter. Helicon filter is a raw editor which also does non-destructive editing of JPEGs and TIFF files. It's available for $30 plus tax for a perpetual license. On the left we can see the folders on my PC. One of those folders is highlighted, and to the right we see a list of the files or images in that folder, and to the right of that we can see the image which is currently highlighted in the list of images. To the right we have information about the file, and we have two tabs over here, and there are always two tabs on this side. In this case, one of them is the file information and the other is a list of presets. For example, I've got one here, white frame with shooting information, and that does what it says. You get to decide, if you want, what appears in this list of presets. You can get rid of these, or any of them you don't want. You can add your own. Along the top are a set of tabs. The first one that we're using at the moment is called Home, and that's the one that has the file info as well as overall presets. The others are Quick Edit, Cropping, Brightness, Colors, Noise, Sharpening, Distortions and Retouching. Those are the ones that are showing on my version of Helicon. You get to decide which of these show here and which show on a drop-down list at the side. I've got 6 in there at the moment, and they are resizing the image, adding text to the image, adding a frame to the image, dealing with chromatic aberration, blurring part of the image, and gradient selection, which I don't know what that is. Let's try using one of these tabs, Quick Edit. Here again we have two tabs on the right, one of which is presets and one of which is what it calls expert mode. This is where you get to see the sliders that you can use. So what I'm going to do is to use a preset. Auto brightness plus sharpening plus saturation. Now when I look at this, and let me put this away at the side to give us a bit more room, and I could make this bigger by rolling the mouse wheel, it looks a bit blue to me. I'd rather have it more yellow. So I'm going to go to the Colors tab, and at the top here I have Color Temperature, and if I slide that a bit, it's gone yellow. Now you'll notice some other things here, and if I open these up, there are more. You may think spectral sensitivity, what on earth is that? Well, one of the nice things about Helicon is that you can open up a panel for help, and if you touch something over here on the right, it takes you to the relevant part of the manual. Now this manual is available as a PDF, so you can read it offline. You can print it and read a printed copy. It's about 35 pages long, well presented, and in my opinion well written, clear and to the point. Whichever of these sliders you click on, it takes you to the help for that slider, and I think that's a really good implementation. I'm going to turn the help off because I'm dealing with a limited area that I can work in, but you can imagine that everything that I'm going to do, it could be tracking and ready to help when I get stuck. What I'm going to do now is to crop this image, so I'll go to the Cropping tab, and here in the normal way I can crop. If we now have a look over on the left, at the bottom we've got a history, and it shows that we've done 3 things: the Quick Edit, colors, that was the white balance, and cropping, resizing. We cropped the image. These can be turned on and off independently, so that, for example, I change the white balance, so if I disable that particular filter, and Helicon does call these separate things filters, hence the name Helicon filter, and you can have a long list of these if you want, and you can, as I say, turn them on and off independently. That's now gone yellower, sorry, it went bluer, now it's gone yellower. Now I've turned that filter back on. Let's look at the next image. Oh, and it's asking me whether I want to save what I've done because I'm moving on to another image. The answer is no, thank you. Here we have, this is a JPEG, and if we take a close look at it, notice by the way that if I click the mouse anywhere on here, I can take a close look at what's underneath. That is well overexposed. I'm now going to open the paired raw file for this, and now I'll put that away to give us a bit more room. There are two things to notice here. One is that we can now see what was completely whited out in the JPEG. The other one is that it hasn't got the geometry right. This was a wide angle image, and there's stuff in the corners that shouldn't be there. I've got a feeling this is something that the photographer accidentally got in the way of the shot, but there is some vignetting up in the corner there. This is not one of my shots, incidentally. I don't know the exact circumstances in which it was captured. Also, those trees look as if they're leaning inwards. We'll come on to that in a moment. In fact, why don't we do that now? If we go to Distortions tab at the top here, it looks to me, things leaning in looks like vertical perspective distortion to me, and so I can straighten them out a bit. I also think that there's some barrel distortion, so I'll straighten that up as well. And perhaps the vertical stuff has gone too far now. Yeah, I'll put that back, that'll do. And I can now go to the cropping tab. What I can't do is get Helicon to crop this for me. There's a good side to that and a bad side. The good side is that it doesn't do what Silky Pix does sometimes, which is crop it too far in so you can't get the picture you want. The bad side is that you do actually have to do it yourself, unlike with Lightroom, which will do it for you. So that's done, the crop. I have no idea why this has come out square, by the way. I don't know the circumstances in which it was taken. The lady who took it was in a bit of a muddle at the time, and I don't know how her camera was set up. Let's now try doing something about the sky. I'm going to try and select the sky. I'm going to go to the Retouching tab and tell it that I want to do a selection. And there are two ways of trying to do the selection. I'm going to use the one where you can tell it two colours to distinguish between. And the first colour is this whitish area up here, and I don't know that I need to tell it what the second colour is. So if there's a bit that's going to be really difficult to pick in amongst that. I'll maybe leave that. So make that a bit bigger. There's that lot. And that's picking the stuff in between. I've had mixed success. Well, that's doing better than it did last time. Now, I've actually got down here, I've got something which I shouldn't have selected. So I'll tell it to erase that part of the selection. But unfortunately, it's not erasing it, which is not very easily. These little bits here. Okay, maybe I need to make it bigger. It's a very fiddly little God, that is... I wonder why that's so difficult. Ah, the tolerance. That's why. Yes, okay. That was user error. You can tell it how much tolerance to have as to the exact colour that it's selecting. And I told it to be too intolerant. So I've now got these selected areas, and so I'm going to go to Colours and tell it that I want to operate on the part that I've selected. Now again, one of the nice things about Helicon is that once you've made a selection, anything that you can do to the whole image you can do to the selection, which is really quite powerful. What I'm going to do now is to, up here, choose a colour, and that's put a bit of colour into the sky. It's also put a bit of magenta around those, so I'd need to find out a bit more about how that works. But the general principle is okay, and I've certainly done it with easier examples. Let's go on to the next example. Do I want to save it? No, thank you. Now here we've got a fairly straightforward image, but see how dark it is. Over on the left here we can see what the JPEG looks like that's embedded within the RAW, and that looks a fairly normal sort of brightness. The reason this looks so dark is that there are two ways of running Helicon in terms of how it deals with highlights. And I've got it set up so that it handles highlights like we saw with the statue really rather nicely. A side effect of that is that when you first open up some images they can look very dark. So if I go to the brightness tab, I'll tell it to auto detect the color, the light level, and now it's back looking quite reasonable. What I want to do is to bring up the shadows. This is very dark here, and so if I go to the shadow slider I can bring up the shadows. Now the thing about shadows is that it can make the image look flat and unnatural, and there's quite a nice slider down here with the odd name of zone size that you can play with to actually counteract this very flat look that you sometimes get when you're bringing up shadows or pulling down highlights as well. So that was pulling up shadows. The next image, here's what the JPEG looks like. It's hazy. So if I load the RAW file now, again it looks very dark, so I can tell it to brighten it up, and I want it to be less hazy. There's a haze section here and there's haze compensation, so I can turn it up. Now it may be that actually I only want this applied at the top of the image, and so I can, if you see that line going down from the top, you can decide how far down you want it, or if you push in the other direction you can have it acting from the bottom up, or if it's in the middle it acts uniformly across the whole image. Next let's look at, oh yes, this image. Now here's what the JPEG looks like. This is again is an image that I've used before. That's what the JPEG looks like. I'm going to open the RAW and it looks extremely dark. That's because these highlights are being protected. This was there was a very big dynamic range compared to what the camera can capture. It was only a little TZ60, and there's always going to be problems with images with this much dynamic range in them. And those of you who've seen some of the other videos will know how I handled this with gradients in Lightroom and in Silky Pix. There aren't any gradients here. Let's see what we can do. I'll pull up the shadows. In fact, the first thing I'll do is to tell it to have a go itself. And I used an aggressive form of auto detection, so it did a lot of it, and actually that's not done too badly. Perhaps I'd like a bit more in the clouds, which makes the bottom darker. Again, the clouds don't look too bad, but the bottom does look very dark now. So what I'm going to do is to go to this retouching, and I've now got a circular cursor, and instead of making a selection, I'm going to change the brightness. And what I'm going to do, and we can see as I move the cursor around, we can see what's going to happen here. So I'll turn it up a bit, make it a bit brighter, even a bit brighter again perhaps. And I'm just going to paint on here, and it's brightening it up. And obviously you can zoom in and fine tune this. In fact, I might say, well, that's rather deep shadow there. Can I bring it up a bit more? And I can a bit more, but well, not a great deal. I might have to, if I go back to brightness, I want to add, it's asking me whether I want to add it to the filter that I've already done for brightness or have a new one. I think I'll have a new one. And I could try bringing the shadows up as well. Ah, there we go. Now we've got this flat look at the bottom, a slightly odd look. So if I use this zone size again, it makes it look a bit better. So you can paint brightness, you can paint saturation changes as well, I believe. Yeah. And you can paint with the colour, and also you can paint selective sharpening and noise reduction and a few other things as well. Another thing you can do is, if I go back to colours, suppose I point at one of these, part of this hedge, and as I move the cursor around, you may see a white line moving over here as I move the cursor around. And if I click somewhere, it leaves a black line behind, and that means that I can tell what the colour was there. And I can then, I'll make this a bit bigger, I can then turn the saturation up. And there it looks pretty ugly in this case, but it has turned the saturation up. It's a bit much, perhaps not quite so much. And I can also turn up the brightness as well. So now we've got it brighter and more saturated. It looks particularly ugly now, but I'm only demonstrating a point, not trying to produce a finished result. So that, if you're good with colours, could be quite a powerful technique to use, I think. That's possibly a bit more natural. And finally, let's look at sharpening. Now this is another image that has problems with highlights. If we go back to here, this is what the JPEG looks like, and we can see that it's very light. But again, the way I've got this set up, it's handled that quite well. But I've got this bee, fly, whatever it is, I should know, drone fly, I think it is, and it's looking, well, it's maybe I would like the fly a bit brighter. What I'll try doing is I'll go to the brightness and I'll try turning the shadows up a bit. And here we've got this flat look again. I quite like the fact that the colours have come up here. It was a bit of a lark trying to get that to happen in one of the other products I was testing this image with. but it has got this horrible HDR look to it. So I'm going to go back to this slider here and play with it, and oh, like magic, it makes it look much better. Now let's zoom in and look at some sharpening. So sharpening is very important for my macros. So I'll go to the sharpening tab and I'll say sharpen edges, and that's what it's doing. There's also a fine detail sharpening, but that's reckoned to be most useful if you're going to be printing. So now I've got this image which I can see the background. If I go back to looking at this resulting image version, that's how it was to begin with, and even that is considerably better in a sense than the JPEG, because the JPEG was really whited out in these areas. So that's how I started when the raw file was read into Helicon, and this is what it's looking like now, with the subject brighter, sharper, and with it's not so dark in the background as well. So that's a quick run through most of what Helicon Filter does. There's also noise reduction. It's a bit difficult to demonstrate that, but there are some alternatives you can use in terms of noise reduction, such as, for example, reducing the noise in areas of particular colours, which could be useful. And remember also that with noise reduction, as with any of these other things, if you've made a selection, you can apply it to the selection. Or, as with all these selections, you can apply it to the selection, or you can apply it to everything that isn't selected. So you've got an inverted selection that you can use, which is, again, very useful sometimes. And there are the odd bits and pieces, like putting text on and putting a frame around it, reducing the pixel size, and dealing with chromatic aberration and blurring parts of the background. So that's Helicon Filter for now. An introduction. I may go into more detail about this. I don't know whether it's really necessary at this point, but for now, that's all. Goodbye.